Hello everybody. It's difficult to be the third one to talk because lots of good ideas have already been presented by the rapporteur of the two other groups, so I hope I won't be too boring for you. First, some preliminary remarks. Some of us could not see how biodiversity loss could impact their activity and their personal life in the next 50 years. But societal investments plays a huge role in biodiversity futures, especially because individual aspiration and the willingness of collective organizations were identified by the group as the biggest drivers of change. However, aspiration in most developing countries means getting as far as possible from nature, and this was, for the member of our group, particularly challenging. But nature and development are not to be opposed. They should be seen as complementary. Evidence, and particularly scientific evidence, is not enough to convince people to change, and decision-making is also about personal subjectivity. So, what can we say about that? We said that we need for a motivational narrative, an inspiring vision that engages people. Therefore, several narratives are needed, especially in parts of the world where aspiration differs. In a set of scenarios, different aspirations can be addressed by different scenarios to make each stakeholder engage. And we also need to work at all spatial and temporal scales, depending on what is most relevant according to the particular spatial and temporal context. We discussed about several concepts in our group: decision, scenarios, ecosystems, values, institution incentives, and about communication and tools that are needed to make this work properly. However, they may be linked that way, which is for sure much more complicated. So, what ideas did we have to fill in the research agenda of future studies about biodiversity? We identified 5 major directions. First, how to make people act in favor of biodiversity conservation. We have to search new ways, new means for imagining motivation narratives, which are positive, desirable, and with social equity. A need of change was identified in the group, from alerting and alarming on the one hand to encouraging and stimulating people on the other hand. But what is motivating people largely depends on the target and on the stakeholder of the scenario exercise. The motivation of a farmer may not be the same as the motivation of the leader of an oil company. Should all scenarios speak to all of them? Another research direction identified was to work on pathways and not only on final images in scenarios. Sustainability pathways, with the widest range of possible options, was thought to be a meaningful way to develop future studies. There was also identified a need for demonstrations, for experiments that promote entirely new possibilities. And finally, how do we set rules to limit or to frame human behavior? And behavioral economics was identified as an important field to explore. Therefore, the psychological background of decision-making, be it collectively or individually, was thought to be very important. We found the same comments than John told us a few minutes before. The second point was, how do we enlarge our epistemological background to think about futures of biodiversity? Here we have questions about ethics and value, about philosophy. And there is therefore a need to involve specialists in those disciplines to reinforce our thoughts and ideas. The third point was, how do we improve our knowledge of ecological systems? For sure, we need to try to continue to understand the system we are studying, more research on ecology, on ecosystem functioning, on biodiversity, function, ecosystem services, and human well-being, and the links between all those 4 concepts. Research about resilience, threshold effects, interactions, and complexity. Research about landscape models and land use, and about some thematics areas like water and biodiversity and agriculture and biodiversity. And ecology itself has its own uncertainty, so we have to continue to search about ecology. The fourth point was, how do we evaluate the results of our action? We pointed on the need for research on indicators, including links with markets. How can we rate countries according to the impact of their natural capital? Is it more efficient to target businesses and corporates or to target citizens and decision makers? What we can see here the common opposition between the technological solution focused on businesses and the ethical solution focused on behavior of citizens to the environmental crisis. Yeah. And the fifth point was, how do we build more convincing scenarios? Research on scenario development is still in its infancy what concerns biodiversity futures. Therefore, three directions have been identified by the group. First, building scenarios for improving deliberative democracy and engaging people. Second, making narrative and the process of building narrative fun. And then linking narratives with models, and especially with biodiversity models. So futures as a field is a topic of research. And finally, what research methods do we need to explore all this agenda? For sure, all methods are useful. Multidisciplinary fundamental research is needed, and about all drivers of change, be it demography or population migrations. We also need experiments, testing and evaluation, and finally, obviously, transfer of experiences and capacity building. All of them are complementary and interlinked, and communication of the results toward all stakeholders was identified by the group as an issue. And finally, as it was too late yesterday evening to make a conclusion, I just put here the 5 points together.